Hello, my name is David Key with Northern Trust. Excited to be here this evening and be partnering with the Slate. And I really am appreciative of the fact that they have reached out to Northern Trust, where we can work together to bring leaders in our community together that are in the not-for-profit space, hear their stories, hear how things have been going for them during the crisis, and really learn from them and hear where they plan on going for the future. So welcome to the comeback. We are going to come back strong. Tonight, we're going to keep it at a really high level and set the stage for the days to come. From arts to philanthropy to education, we're going to cover it all. And tonight, we start with the Communities Foundation of Texas. Let's get it started.
My name is Megan Steinbach with Northern Trust, and we are so excited to be here in partnership with the Slate, and really excited to kick off this series with an overview of philanthropy, both on a national level and on a local level. I am joined by two experts in their field, Ryan McCauley, who leads our foundational and institutional advisory practice for Texas at Northern Trust, and Sarah Cotton Nelson, who is the Chief Philanthropy Officer with Communities Foundation of Texas. To start, Ryan, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about what you're seeing on a national level, because you have such a unique perspective with Northern Trust having that reach nationally and globally. Will you share with us what's happening in an overview of philanthropy today?
Absolutely, Megan, and thank you for that intro. We work in our foundation and institutional practice with about 400 clients across the country. And so we're seeing some trends develop, and I wanted to touch on a few of those larger trends before we jump into specifics here. So if we start with higher education, we've obviously seen some revenue disruption from endowment volatility, reduced spending, and of course, enrollment decreases, and an uptick in expenses related to online learning. And one thing that we're keeping an eye on is a wave of lawsuits that's been filed. In fact, there are 125 different public and private universities named as defendants in class action lawsuits from students alleging that a breach of contract has occurred and seeking refunds for things like tuition, parking, housing, dining, and other costs. As part of those cases, the courts are being asked to decide if online education is commensurate with an in-class experience. And there's a lot of local universities and colleges that are also affected by this. So it's something everybody is watching carefully. Additionally, there are some universities that are leading the charge when it comes to a different type of response. I'd like to highlight Prairie View A&M for launching a Center for Race and Justice, as well as mandating a class for all incoming students on the history of race and relations. Now, it's interesting too, because not all higher education is affected in a negative way. Community colleges are actually counter-cyclical. So they're expecting an increase in enrollment, not only because individuals are needing retraining or re-education, but as employees lose their jobs, they're moving into the community college space to then go on and get their next opportunity in the workforce. That said, they are tasked, the community colleges are tasked with providing a lot of the infrastructure needed for the technology that students have to continue their education. We talked to one community college recently who spent almost $1 million of the grants they've received on things like computers, internet access, and other technological assistance for their students so they can continue their coursework. If we jump over to the healthcare space, unfortunately, healthcare was really the biggest drag on the economy for the first quarter, and spending fell by an annualized rate of about 18% during that time period. And a lot of that is driven by elective procedures being pushed off as patients really are trying to avoid the hospital if they can at this time. The American Hospital Association estimates that the nation's healthcare systems will collectively lose about $36 billion for the 3 months ending June just by treating COVID-19 patients. And if you factor in the elective procedures that are being postponed, that number grows to something more like $200 billion. Now, the government, through Congress, has already authorized $175 million to be allocated to hospitals, but there's still a big gap left that will have to be addressed at some point in the future. And actually, I've lived this a little bit myself. My father is 84 years old. He's been hospitalized for a long time leading up to the lockdown, and we still have to take him in for visits each week at the hospital. There are certain procedures we're putting off until later, and I can tell you from personal experience, it's eerie to be in a hospital with mostly empty halls and a lot of temperature checks. And I think right now you're hearing a lot about the virus peaking in Texas, and especially in Dallas. As of the end of last week, we got an update saying that there are over 6,000 beds from 25 different hospitals, across the city, and 2/3 of those beds, including the ICUs, are already at capacity, but only 1/3 of the ventilators are currently in use. So Dallas is certainly ready and prepared for what's to come. You know, if I could maybe shine a bright light on what's happening in our environment right now, there's a lot of talk about what the Ford Foundation is doing. And the Ford Foundation is a multi-billion-dollar foundation, which is really forward thinking in the industry. And what they're doing is borrowing $1 billion in what they call social bonds, which means they're providing funding for nonprofit organizations like operating nonprofits and museums so they can continue to fund their operations during this difficult time. So I think it's really interesting to look at how local partnerships, along with city, state, government, private foundations, are really going to come together to improve the quality of life for the local communities.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Ryan. And I think that that's a great segue to talk about how the Communities Foundation really engages with our local philanthropic organizations. And for those that are watching, Sarah, will you just tell us, what is a Communities Foundation for anybody who doesn't know?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I mean, it isn't something that you grow up knowing necessarily. There actually is a community foundation in almost every major city, and it is a 501c3 nonprofit foundation that was actually built on the banking model to be essentially a philanthropic bank. Today it operates very much the same way, where you can come in as an individual or as a family or as a corporation and open a fund, which is exactly like a bank account with your name on it or your family's name or whatever you choose to name it. Put money in that account as much as you like, as often as you like, and it's very similar, again, to a bank account that you can see online exactly how much money you have, and then give away that money over time to any 501c3 nonprofit charity in good standing with the IRS. So that ranges far and wide from local organizations to your alma mater, which may be in a completely different state. It's incredibly easy. We give advice to donors who have funds set up so that if people are interested, for example, in moving the needle on education, they're able to do so by either choosing what they love to do in the field of education or asking us who's doing great work in that area, and then we can give them advice.
That's really nice and a great way to really help your donors find a way to leave their legacy and what they're passionate about. So what a wonderful opportunity. And how does, as the Communities Foundation looks at COVID and everything that's happened, how do you partner with whether it's philanthropic organizations or the city in addressing things during disaster and disaster recovery?
Well, what I just described really is sort of the structure of how a community foundation works. But philosophically, what we're all about is about thriving communities for all. So everything we're trying to do is to come up under and support the community to be thriving. And that concept of for all is not a throwaway. It really is about creating equitable opportunities that result in equitable outcomes for every single member of our community. Obviously, during COVID-19, that thriving is being threatened and really pulling many, many people across our community back to simply trying to survive. And so that's right where we need to be. We do that in a number of ways. One is through coordination. So we are a coordinator between the City of Dallas, Dallas County, and nonprofits across our North Texas region, looking for where are the gaps in service to people. This is done through the relationships that we have made over time, and sometimes we get practice runs. So for instance, during the Ebola crisis in Dallas, we had to figure out how do we get groceries and food to families who are being asked to quarantine and not leave their living residences. And that turned out to be, again, good practice for having to do that on a really large scale here in Dallas during the COVID-19 pandemic. So working with the county and with nonprofits and with the city to say, who are the food pantries in town? Where are they located? Where do we have gaps? And pulling people together to identify where the gaps are and to find creative solutions to the key challenges that we discover.
That's wonderful.
The second thing that we do is we coordinate with other funders. We are one of many foundations in town, and at the beginning of this crisis, we all were saying, what can we do? What should we be doing? We were all reaching out to nonprofits that we knew around town to find out what they were needing, and really it was very apparent that what was most needed was for us as funders all to get on the same page, because sure. It's quite a burden if you're a nonprofit to have to go looking for funds and to know every single individual foundation. What do they fund? How do I get the money? And we came together as a group and started talking about what can we do to reduce that burden. Mm-hmm. And initially got together with the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, the Dallas Foundation, the North Texas Community Foundation, and that group grew to over 30 nonprofits, to over 30 foundations, both family foundations, corporate foundations, and community foundations that came together to create a web portal called northtexascares.org, where any nonprofit can apply for funds related to support of COVID-19 needs, and have all of those different foundations then take a look at their applications and potentially fund them.
What a wonderful resource for our philanthropic organizations. I serve on the board for a couple here in Dallas, and the primary conversation that we are having right now is cash flow, right? How do we fund? How do we continue to provide services at the level that we were and manage the cash flow that's coming in because of all the events that have been canceled and things like that? And, Ryan, I'd love to hear from you on what you're seeing in the nonprofit partners that you work with, and how are they having to shift operationally, and what are they seeing as some kind of unique challenges, and then adapting to the changes that COVID has presented them with?
Yeah, Megan, great point. So staffing has really been a major issue for a lot of nonprofits. A lot of job cuts have had to be made. And nonprofits were already resource constrained to begin with, and now you have the remaining staff taking on the responsibilities for the departing staff. And it really turns out that this environment is ripe for fraudulent activity. Last year alone, there was over 1.4 million instances of fraud costing billions of dollars in losses. And now we're seeing a huge uptick in real-time cyber attacks against nonprofits specifically. These attempts sometimes look very legitimate, and even can involve the correct email addresses from staff, but a lot of times they're fraudulent. So, as if we didn't already have enough on our plates, we now should be brushing up on our cybersecurity expertise. And what we are telling all our clients right now is, pick up the phone and make a call to verify funds transfers. Make sure your mobile devices and computers are updated, strengthen your home network, and also deploy as many antivirus software protections as you can. And if you are working from home, talk to your family about internet security. It's really important in this day and age that everybody's on the same page, whether you're in an office or at home.
That makes so much sense. I think that, not only is the nonprofit community facing that, but, we're really hearing that from across the board, businesses, personal. It's such a great point that everyone is really experiencing that cybersecurity issue. And I think to your point there, what we're seeing is, so you had the original funding need for nonprofits to provide the level of services that they were. But now you're also having issues in the cost of cybersecurity alone. And so, Sarah, to go back to something we were talking about earlier, is you get to see the donor side as well, right? You get to help these donors really leave their legacy, engage their family members. But I'd be really curious to hear from you, how has the donor's voice changed over the last 3 months? And what impact has that had on the gifts that they are giving?
Well, I would begin by saying really one of the strongest things that we see is sort of the order of magnitude of giving. We really can see the generosity of response in the number of gifts and the amount of giving that has been going on in response to this pandemic. Normally between the start of the year and May, we would see about $5.5 million worth of gifts from donor advised funds going out the door. And this year, during the same period, that was more than doubled to 13 million. So just the heart response from people knowing that there are others in need and they have money to give and they want to do that. So that's the first thing and really the most overwhelming. Donor advised funds on occasion get a bit of a bad rap for being perceived as warehousing money. But the truth of the matter is that they're very useful in being counter-cyclical. When other donors, their investment portfolios are down, other people have lost their jobs, and they aren't able to fulfill their commitments to nonprofits that those nonprofits are counting on, donor advised fund holders tend to be quite responsive during a crisis.
That's wonderful. And so impactful, I think, and just meaningful, right? That they are able to continue giving and give more, right? Than just what they were giving, even just on an average. What I'd also be interested to hear from you is, and I personally donated because I love North Texas Giving Day, but you had a North Texas Giving Day now as well, correct?
Yes, that's right. It was actually May 5th. We partnered with the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas and the Dallas Cowboys to put on North Texas Giving Tuesday now. Over 45,000 individual donors contributed on that day and raised over $20 million. Now, that could go to anything. It could go to pandemic response, but it also could go to all of the nonprofits whose operating budgets really need support now because people's fundraisers have been disrupted because people can't gather the way they normally would for fundraisers. And as I said before, there are a lot of donors who want to be giving what they've committed, but really have lost enough money either in their portfolios or through loss of their jobs that they're not able to.
Sure. And will you guys have still a North Texas Giving Day this fall?
We will indeed. So North Texas Giving Day is slated for Thursday, September 17th. And we hope to continue the great sort of kickstart that North Texas Giving Tuesday now created in May, because absolutely nonprofits are going to need more individuals to continue to give. The amount of pressure that the pandemic puts across all of the nonprofit sector is really quite extreme, and they need your help.
That's wonderful. Well, we are excited for the fall. I always think it's amazing. I love when you log on to North Texas Giving Day and you see the numbers just tick up as you're completing your gift. You watch them as they move up. And I always, you get the messages from the nonprofits that you contribute to, and it means so much to them. Every dollar makes a difference. And I just think it's so wonderful that there is this partnership amongst the different funders within our community to have that recognition and step up and step in and really engage the community. So I commend you all on what you are doing. I think it is just phenomenal.
Well, thank you. And I love it personally because I too give on North Texas Giving Day, and I love how easy it is. I love how I can have a list of the agencies that I normally give to and can put them all in at one time. And also I can browse others, by subject to see, gosh, during COVID-19 pandemic response, who else is doing good work that I should be reporting, and add someone to my list.
That's wonderful. Ryan, as we listen to all of the amazing things that are happening, and You know, it's often said that during the roughest time, the best part of people come out. What silver linings are you seeing, and how can the community really engage to support organizations and ensure that the comeback is greater than the fall?
Megan, that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. Leadership is forged in crisis, and we're going through a crisis right now. And for nonprofits, that means fundraising, and fundraising is evolving. Several of our clients were already involved in capital campaigns before the virus hit, and they're receiving a lot of advice from fundraising consultants about addressing the specific circumstances with confidence and authenticity. There's a need to provide a tie-in between the narrative and the mission of your organization, as well as your core values, with what's happening in the community right now. Giving always grows as donors seek a genuine impact from the agencies that they value. And to secure gifts during this time of crisis, it's important to act with clarity, conviction, and of course, transparency. You know, as it relates to events, which you guys have already covered a little bit, a lot of clients are postponing events, moving events, changing the structure of events. We've got a lot of big ticket gala type dinners that are moving to online auctions. We've got a lot of events that are moving from this year to next year altogether, because the truth is we really don't know what the fundraising environment is going to look like 6 months from now or 12 months from now. So of course, flexibility, communication, and confidence is really key in the fundraising environment.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more, Ryan. I think that having to adapt to the change, finding creative ways and creative solutions to be able to fill that gap, right? It's always about filling that gap. As you were talking about your work with governments and communities to let's ensure we fill that gap. Well, now our nonprofit partners are really being challenged to fill that. And again, Sarah, I'd love to hear from you on this too, as you look at the nonprofit partners that you work with and the donor side. I'd love that you get to provide us with the view from both sides. How have you seen people really step up and step in, and what else, how else do you feel like we can really engage our community to help with this comeback?
Well, one thing I think is important for everyone to know is there are always 3 phases, generally speaking, in any kind of disaster or crisis, whether it's a tornado or a man-made event or a virus. So you begin with emergency response, and that is when the most emergent needs, there's nothing to do but address those emergent needs. It's when you typically see the Red Cross and shelters come into play. And this is the phase that we've been in really for months. Sometimes it's only a few days related to a tornado, but in this case, it's been a number of months. And that's when the greatest needs are most in the news. You know, the emergent issues are the things that make headlines. But the fact is there are 2 other phases of recovery, and one is that sort of disaster recovery period followed by rebuilding. Sometimes it's rebuilding buildings related to a hurricane or tornado. In our case, it really is going to be building back the economy and fundraising efforts in the nonprofit and community and that sort of thing. And so it's important for donors to know if you've given money now, you are giving toward the emergent issues, but to know the more you can share continually over the next 12 to 18 months, it's really going to be important, because those next 2 phases, recovery and rebuilding, actually are the most expensive and they're more complicated. So one of the things that we see from our donors and as us as a foundation is that our initial money went to the things that are the most crisis-oriented. Can we get food into the hands of people that need it? Do people have a safe place to stay? That's not only a roof over their head, but also during these times of economic crisis, stress goes up related to loss of job, loss of income, and the stress of trying to handle COVID-19 on top of it. And that means domestic violence is up. So people may not be aware that actually our domestic violence shelters are completely bursting at the seams. So those happen in the first stage, and we've been giving to support that because you want people straight up to just survive to begin with. This next phase, though, we begin to sort of widen the aperture on what is needed, and that includes things like, okay, as long as everyone has food and a safe place to stay, now we have to think about students. And, initially people thought, people were just going to be out of school, students were just going to be out of school for a little while, and now it may be a much more extended period of time. So while internet access was important in the first semester that this is going on, it is going to be compoundingly important in the next coming school year, because if you don't have internet access and you don't have a device with which to connect, you really are shut out of education, and that's only going to compound the educational inequities that are already in our system. So it's really important. And then finally, donors and us as a foundation as well are looking at what we need to be doing strategically for the next phase. So we just recently have made a grant to do regional strategic planning to increase COVID-19 testing and contact tracing, because a lot of being able to completely open up the economy hinges on having really good testing and contact tracing in place and accessible to all people.
Absolutely. I think that there is this concern out there, this sense of concern about everyone going back out so quickly and then seeing a further resurgence of it. And so I love that you guys are stepping in there and partnering with that. I also love, and I don't think you know this, but you also highlighted two things that we're going to also be talking about during this series, which is an interview with Jan Langbine, who is the CEO of Genesis Women's Shelter, and Byron Saunders, who's the CEO of Big Thought, who are addressing two of the things that you talked about there on the domestic violence front and on the educational front, and really helping, again, close that gap and provide services when we're seeing such a rise in demand. And so it really is, the need is so prevalent right now, and we just are so grateful for, funders like the Communities Foundation, for your donors, and for the partners that are out there every day in these organizations, having to try to figure out how to social distance and, still engage and still have an impact and still impact change within our community. So it is a tough challenge, but it's one that the strength of the Dallas philanthropic community, we will come back greater. I firmly believe that. And so I just want to wrap up with any silver linings that you've seen that you haven't shared. Is there anything else, Ryan, we can start with you. Any other silver linings that you'd like to share that you've seen with your nonprofit clients?
Sure. We've talked a lot about governance in the last couple months. From the market high on February 19th to the low on the 23rd, this was one of the fastest bear markets on record. So board members of grant-making organizations were really forced into a difficult position. They have a fiduciary responsibility for prudent oversight of the assets of their fund, as well as a requirement to provide a social benefit to the community. So what does that mean in light of a steep correction? It means that flexibility is important. It means the policies that govern your decision-making have to be in line, and the ability to preserve the integrity of strategic asset allocations by tilting exposures in different asset classes, depending on how your policy is written, is of paramount importance at this time. So we recommend that you review your investment policy statement at least annually, and especially right now in this time of volatility, to make sure that your distribution requirements can be met for the organizations that you serve. Also, make sure your investment policy addresses not only spending, but gift acceptance, return targets, and asset allocation ranges. And again, we recommend doing that on an annual basis.
That is wonderful. I do think that as organizations have to turn inward and really focus on that cash need and how do you fund, I think sometimes some of those overall governance necessities can fall behind. And so it stops being at the forefront of your mind on things you need to do. But it's probably even more important, to your point, Ryan, to really address that right now. And I know, Sarah, we've talked about, so many silver linings with North Texas Giving Day now and what you're doing for the community cares. Anything else that you want to share, or any other challenge to donors or to our community on how we can be engaged and have an even bigger impact in what you all are doing?
Well, I would just reiterate some of the things we've already talked about. If individuals have money, that if you would give it, that is a really important thing right now and will continue to be as the pandemic continues. If you have time but not money, I know a lot of people are laid off right now. There are volunteer opportunities, and at least in this region, you can go to volley.org, VOLY.org, and be able to see what kind of volunteer activities that you can do that meet social distancing requirements, because there are nonprofits that need volunteers right now. A third thing is to find locally where your own response funds are and give to that. So ours is North Texas Community Response Fund, but that fund, we've already raised $2 million. We've given away $1 million, but we want to continue to have money into that fund so that we can support the medium and long-term needs as well. And then finally, just bringing things back to current events, the sort of silver lining on the very dark cloud of what's been going on across America is the dark cloud being racism and some of the examples of structural racism that we've seen in our community just recently, but we have obviously been seeing those much more prevalently since people can hold an iPhone in their pocket and video whatever comes up. So whether it's Amy Cooper making a false claim on 911 in Central Park, or George Floyd really essentially being killed on video in front of all of America to see, racism has to be addressed. And this is one thing that I'm sure that Byron Sanders can talk to you about. He's doing tremendous work with Big Thought to come up under and support youth as they really try to engage in education and creativity so that they can go on to lead very successful lives. And yet racism is sort of the wind against them that really is quite a force that many people, as people who are white, and I can say that I certainly was one of them, we don't realize how often that wind is at our back. And so often, we say to ourselves, well, no, I worked hard for where I am, and that's how I got here. And I liken it to an experience I had. I own a canoe, and one day I went canoeing and did not realize that there was wind. Now, I knew I wanted to go across the lake, and I knew up to a very specific river. And so I paddled like mad, and I was very intentional about the direction. That intentionality got me there. I also worked really hard because I was trying to make good time. It was lovely. I didn't realize the wind at my back that was helping me along until I turned my canoe around. And this is where we need to be stepping into other people's shoes and realizing then I was paddling the same paddle like mad to get back across the lake, and yet I was at a dead standstill. And I had not done anything different in terms of how hard I was working, but there was something different, which was the wind was against me. And this is so true often for people of color and our society in general when it comes to structural racism. And people are saying now that it's not enough to say you're not a racist. We have to be an anti-racist, and to be doing that work to really discover what it means if you're white to have the wind at your back. And if you have taken advantage of that opportunity, even unbeknownst to you, once you recognize it, there may be ways that you can turn around and help someone else along.
Absolutely, and we are so excited for our conversation with Byron to really talk about that and how we can, as moms, dads, business leaders, community leaders, servant leaders, how can we teach our children, how can we engage our friends and our communities in the right conversations to help us get better and be better. And so I agree with you, and I think that it's such a huge issue for our community, and I'm so glad that you brought that up and brought it to light. It is something that I think we all have to work on, to your point, and looking forward to talking to Byron about that even more and really helping our audience understand some tips from him on how we can do that. And from my perspective, how can I talk to my kids about this and what can I do so that they don't grow up with some of the same biases and things like that that are out there in the world today?
Well, there is no growth without discomfort. So that is one of the things that we talk about a lot in doing this work, is that you have to get ready to be uncomfortable. And yet through that discomfort, there's a lot of growth available to us all.
Absolutely. Well, I am so grateful for your time today. Ryan, thank you so much. I think that what we heard here today is that we need to have uncomfortable conversations. Our nonprofit partners are having uncomfortable conversations right now. But as a community, we can step up, we can engage, and we can be part of the change and really ensure that this comeback is greater than the setback. So thank you for your time today. It was such a privilege to get to speak with you. And Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.